Today we have next part of our journey with Elijah, winning the battle with God on your side, part 4a. And I would say it will be very practical and helpful part, because one of the key topics or one of the subjects which we will closely look at will be depression. Do you know that Elijah passed through the period of heavy depression? And we've talked about that God is not only God of the winners, our God is also a God of the losers. Those people who are down, those people who are lost their courage, or at least they were close to losing courage. He also a God of those who hate the life itself. He also a God of those who hate this world and themselves. He is caring, compassionate, and loving God who is able to correct, to uplift, to encourage, and then to send. Sometimes we do send people for a mission, but they never been prepared. And in reality what we do, we send them for destruction. Sometimes we praying for people, but we do not expose the root of the problem. We should never pray for people without confession. We have to confess their sins, their iniquities, their crimes. And in our case today with Elijah, we will see how he had been struggling, how angry he was about himself, about life in general. He wanted to depart from this world. You know this story. So winning the battle with God on your side, part 4a. And as I said, since we're talking about depression, let's define it. Depression definition. First line. It is severe sadness and gloom typically felt over a period of time. And I just want to turn your attention, typically felt. Very often depression is a distorted reality of a person. So person sees reality in a distorted way, exactly as Elijah has done. But still those feelings are involved, typically felt over a period of time and accompanied, again, by feelings. So feelings are very much involved into this situation. When we rely on feelings, we can end up in a severe depression. As a human beings, we have to be very careful and very wise. Do not stay on how do I feel. Because reality is not only about how do I or you feel. Reality it is an objective system which depends on God, not on how do we feel. But still, accompanied by feelings of hopelessness and insufficiency. I never really kept attention on insufficiency part. But insufficiency is very important. As human beings, we are educated, we are gifted. God gave to us many gifts and talents to accomplish something in our life. But when we put into situations when we do not really can apply our gifts and talents, that causes in us those feelings of insufficiency. That's exactly what happened with Elijah. As a human being, he was alone. He was not really alone in Israel, but in his setting, he still was alone. And he was brave enough to confront the system, but when it came to the fear of his own life, he gave up. And he was very frustrated and upset about that. And I understand him. So what insufficiency includes? It includes impotence, inability, inadequacy, incapability, or powerlessness. And as human beings, of course, our power is limited. And again, as humans, especially those who are talented and gifted, they rely. Remember I told you many times, people who are handy, who have good hands, they very often end up in depression. Because they relied on their hands, they are skilled, but time comes and God allows for those times to come into human being life. Because he wants to show to that talented individual that not everything in control of his own capability, on his own hands. And as a result, that person can be depressed when he gets powerless. And second line is the act of lowering something or pressing something down. We should never press people down, even when they are guilty. Why? Because first of all, God is in control. He knows how to press them from inside down. But what difference between us and God? We never know real measure. Sometimes we press too much. God knows He's very sensitive and He is very capable to press with a level which is understandable and effective enough for that individual. So we have to give it to God. It's like we keep forgetting to turn off the heater or the water heater in the gym. Doesn't matter how much I would press people, they still will forget. And I know that. Because they are incapable by some reasons. It's a very simple matter, but they are incapable to turn off this heater all the time. I told them several times. So we should be creative. We should understand that humans are a limited creature. The act of lowering something or pressing something down. That second line of depression definition. Now, let's see what some famous people told about depression. Overcoming depression with God's help. First one, on your left. If you are depressed, you are living in the past. If you are anxious, you are living in the future. If you are at peace, you are living in the present. And our God actually is a God who past for Him and future for Him is still present. There is no distance for Him between past and future. He always at present time. He is I am. He is not I was. He is not I will be. He is I am in the past. He is I am in the future. And He, of course, He is I am today. So He also wants for us to be people I am. Because our God is I am. That is why it says here, if you are at peace, you are living in the present time. On your right, on the top, the depressing thing about tennis is that no matter how good I get, I'll never be as good as a wall. This individual, this sportsman understands that he is a limited creature. Yes, he is very skilled, he is a professional tennis player, but he is a limited creature. Low one. You know this guy, right? Robert De Niro. Any depression should be met with a smile. Depression will think you are an idiot and will run away. So he uses sense of humor to face depression. And we see here our main story, which is taken from first book of Kings, chapter 19, verses 1 through 10. What are you doing here, Elijah? Said God to Elijah when he was in depression. Starting with verse 1. And Ahab told Jezebel. So we see how Elijah was courageous in how he confronted the whole system of false prophets and society, and God was on his side, right? God amazingly put fire and licked even water around the altar, and of course wood too. So he accepted sacrifice which Elijah brought. And Elijah got great victory on the top of the mountain. Now we will see what's going to happen when Elijah is in the valley of depression. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, also how he had executed all the prophets with the sword. Of course they were false prophets. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, so let the gods do to me. She cursed herself. Later God will do, not God, not her pagan God, but God of Israel will do what she said right here, and even more than she ever could think about that. But the problem is, see how perverted, blind, and stupid she was. After fire which came down from heaven and eaten all what was on the altar, even water had been licked up. She still relies on her gods. What does it say about her individuality? That she is very short-sighted, critically, terribly short-sighted individual. Yes, she is smart, she is very sneaky, she knows how to manipulate, but for her own life she was very blind and short-sighted. Let the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time. So what she really says to him, I'm going to kill you. But what is interesting, she gave him 24 hours. Have you noticed? She could kill him right away. So why did she give him 24 hours? Have you ever thought about that? I think God is involved into that. God gave him 24 hours to escape. So in our lives, sometimes when we confront the system, sometimes we go to our own execution. And sometimes God uses even wicked rulers, perverted, blind rulers to spare our lives when we cross the line. When we cross the line in our courage, God sometimes prevents our own execution with the use of wicked rulers, like in this case. She gave him 24 hours. Now, of course, fear came to him. I think Elijah got into depression, slided into depression, because he realized that he could not conquer the fear for his own life. What he realized in this situation, that he is powerless, limited human being. And for him, after great victory, when we are on the top of the mountain and we got great victory, and suddenly we realize that we just simple humans, it is very negative, very heavy message to us. We really struggle with that because we would like to be always victorious and powerful. And when he saw that, have you noticed verse 3? When he saw that, not heard that, but saw that. He probably saw the messenger with his crew, with his weaponized unit who came. He realized that very often he can be executed. He rose and ran for his life. We can again blame him that he acted as a coward here. But I do not blame here. I believe that God spared him. As a one human being, he could be easily destroyed in the midst of that story. But God decided to spare him for further, much more greater mission, and eventually just to spare him from dying at all. We know that, right? So he rose and ran for his life. Just want to tell you something. When you are in a ministry, you and me, we, not our bosses, not our friends, not our neighbors, not those for whom we are serving, to whom we are serving, are responsible for our own life. Who is the first individual who is responsible for his own life? That is why loving others starts with loving ourselves. We cannot love others if we do not love ourselves. It doesn't work. If we never knew how to love ourselves, we would never knew how to love others. If we are destructive to ourselves, we will be destructive to other people. Even if we will try our best to do our best, we still will be destructive if we are destructive to ourselves. We have always remembered that. This is very important. In this situation, Elijah loved himself. Time came to him, and God, that is why God gave to him 24 hours to escape. Do you remember what Jesus said? When Jerusalem will be surrounded by the foreign invaders, what to do? What he said? Suddenly he said those invaders will step back. And do you remember what he told citizens of Jerusalem to do? To run for their lives to the mountains. So our God is always the same. He is loving. That is why he said suddenly those invaders will step back, give you a channel to escape, and ran for his life and went to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. Why he went to Beersheba, Judah? Because Judah was known as the one of the most righteous provinces in Israel. So he left servant in Judah in order for servant to be spared too, to be safe in this. But for himself, see verse 4, but he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. Now, where John the Baptist went, do you remember? For his ministry, where he went? To the wilderness, right? Where Jesus went? To the wilderness. So what is wilderness for you and for me? How do you see wilderness? What is the wilderness? First of all, who has called the place wilderness? Humans, people. For God there is no wilderness because God's earth, whole earth belongs to God. God's order everywhere. There is no wilderness. You know why humans call the place where they do not live wilderness? Because they consider it as a wild place without human structures. But who told to humans that every place on earth without their structure is wild? It's much more harmonious than every human structure, right? We humans think that perfect geometry should be everywhere, but God doesn't see harmony as perfect geometry. My right half of face is different from my left half as well as yours. Because God's beauty is different, God's harmony is different. Why God led Elijah to the wilderness? Because Elijah should get special lesson. Also, he should get special power for continuation of his ministry. Same with John the Baptist, same with Jesus himself. Do you remember that Jesus came back from the wilderness? What was the difference for him coming back from the wilderness, so-called wilderness? He came in the power of the Spirit of the Holy One. He cut himself from human society, from human structures to get power of the Holy One, because Holy One would not share his power with power of humans. So he went for a day's journey to save himself from execution and came and sat down under a broom tree. Do you think he sat down accidentally under the broom tree? Absolutely no. God played a very funny but at the same time sarcastic game with Elijah. Broom from Hebrew, racham. It is a root word of the mercy. God actually doesn't have one mercy. When we say in Hebrew language mercy, we say rachamim, which means many mercies. God has many mercies. His mercies are endless. But he placed himself on the tree, which is translated from Hebrew to bind or attach. He actually attached himself under the mercy and provision of God literally, but he didn't realize that because he was frustrated with his humanness. He realized that he just a simple human being. He is not mighty, powerful warrior who can always confront society. He ran away like a coward. And he prayed that he might die. He was so severely depressed about his insufficiency. Do you remember? We just defined depression as a matter of insufficiency. He felt himself insufficient, incapable. And as a result, he was so frustrated that he asked God to die. And said, "It is enough. It is enough." It was actually a very great insult thrown to the face of the Lord. Because the word enough in Israel should be used totally opposite. Long time the history of Passover speaks about it is enough for me because of God's care. It is enough for me because of God's provision. It is enough for me because God always guides me and puts me through many difficulties and problems. He totally uses this word in opposite way. It is enough means kill me. Now, Lord, take my life, which means I am not satisfied with what I have. Kill me, take my life, for I am no better than my father. My fathers, he speaks about generations. He says, I am covered as my father, my grandfather, and grandfather was. They ran for their lives. Now I'm running for my own life. Yes, it is really a loser time. The time to get real balanced. Balanced walk with God includes winning time and losing time. On a scale of balanced life, there are two sides. Winning time and losing time. Time to be victorious and time to live as a coward. As someone who is neglected not only by society but also by himself. Elijah despised himself. He was not happy about himself. He was the biggest and most harsh judge of himself. But that's what was required for Elijah to get wisdom of dependency on God and humbleness. Humble person realizes that he or she is nothing without God. If person thinks that he or she is something without God, then losing time stays ahead of the road. God will show everyone that without him, this person is complete loser. Verse 6. Then as he lay and slept under a broom tree. So what normally depression includes? Besides drinking alcohol. He didn't have alcohol. Sleeping time, right? Sleeping time. So that's typical signs of depression. Now we see how God treats depression. It is a great lesson for me and for you. He lay and slept under a broom tree, which symbolizes mercy of the Lord. Suddenly, an angel, and that not was simple angel, that was the angel of the Lord, the main angel, touched him and said to him, arise and eat. Very simple message, very basic message. There is no any psychological sessions, right? Just simple, basic need was met. Arise and eat. Then he looked, and there by his head was a cake baked on coals. My question to you, who were first providers for Elijah? Do you remember? Birds. Do you remember? Who was the second provider for Elijah? A widow, right? Now, who is the third provider for Elijah? Angel of the Lord. Ravens and widow and the angel of the Lord are in the same row. See? When God uses us for his mission, he is ready to help us with ravens. By the way, do you know that ravens are struggling now with the temperature? Can I ask you, when you come back home, just put some water near your home for the birds? Do you see the spectrum of the help, of the resources of help, from the lowest ones, I don't know who likes ravens. Not many people, at least. I don't know who really values widows. Widows, especially in Israel, was very despised at this time, very despised. Now it came to one of the highest hierarchy, angel of the Lord himself. Arise and eat. He looked, and there by his head was a cake baked on coals. Also coals remind us about sacrificial place. Also it reminds us to the showbread, sacrificial bread of the altar. Remember that David himself and his soldiers had been fed by the same showbread because they were on the mission. Later Jesus said that, it is most important for God to support his messengers, much more important than even sacrifice process or regulations or restrictions, and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. Depression didn't stop yet. Lay down again. Elijah led God first by the altar. Fed God. Do you remember that? Elijah fed God by the altar on the Mount Carmel. He provided food and water. Do you remember? Now God returned back food and water for Elijah.
That's right.
Elijah fed God before when he was in victorious time, right? God fed Elijah when Elijah was a loser. When we honor God during good times in our lives, God will honor us during bad time in our lives. When we forget about God at good times in our lives, God would not forget, but he let us experience more pain, more bitterness, more depression. When I say depression is not a reality. Depression, it is a matter of our distorted reaction on objective reality. But still, God knows the measure, the measure, discipline measure. The angel of the Lord came back the second time. Very interesting, it says came back. Not flew back, but came back. So he probably didn't depart too far from him. Came back the second time and touched him and said again, touched him and said, arise and eat. Also, maybe it doesn't say for you too much, touched. When angel of the Lord touched Elijah, another angel departed. It wasn't accidentally. When he get into physical contact with Elijah, another angel departed. This angel's name is angel of heaviness, spirit of heaviness, or heavy spirit, which is involved into giving to you and to me feelings of insufficiency and gloom. This spirit name, this angel name is the angel of heaviness. But angel of heaviness would never come inside of you if you would not provide legal reason for him to come inside of you. As a matter of discipline is human pride. When human being is prideful, God will send this angel, or will allow this angel of heaviness to come inside of us, and then we go to doctors and we get those pills. Do you understand what I'm talking about? You are invaded by the angel. Instead of dealing with that, you go to the doctor and asking, doctor, please prescribe for me, sleeping pills. Do you see how stupid it is? How not wise it is? We cannot deal with spiritual issues by chemicals. With spiritual issues we have to deal in a spiritual way. With chemicals we have to do in a chemical, natural way. We should not mess up supernatural with natural, because it's two different worlds. He came back to the second time and touched him and said, arise and eat, because the journey is too great for you. So twice he has been fed by the angel of the Lord, because the mission was too great. In other words, it was impossible for Elijah to accomplish it just by human power. Impossible. Without God to be involved with us or in our lives, it is impossible for me and for you to accomplish what God gave to you and to me. God knows that. That is why he always sends those helpers to feed us, and those helpers can come in a form of ravens whom we despise and neglect, and those helpers can come to us as someone who is an outcast in the human society, and those helpers can come to us as supernatural beings, angels, who touched actually. He got into physical contact with Elijah. So he arose, ate and drank second time, and he went in the strength of that food. It doesn't say here, he went in, this song, in the strength of the Lord. No, he went in the strength of that food. There are two types of food. Food which we provide for ourselves. We end up very shortly after that food. And food which is provided by the Lord himself, which is taken from where? From the altar. Spiritual food. He went in the strength of that food, spiritual food, which was provided by, it was physical, but sanctified food by the altar of that food. 40 days and 40 nights. Can you imagine? 40 days and 40 nights just by 2 meals at one time. Are you ready for that mission, for that journey? I'm sure he lost all weight. He never needed any diet after that. And actually, I thought when I started counting, approximately 30 kilometers per day one normal human being can make. So you will multiply, it will be approximately 1,500 kilometers. But distance was much more shorter than this, because if you will go 1,500 kilometers, you will probably end up in Egypt. But he just reached the Mount Horeb. So he approximately went 420 kilometers, the distance. So he stopped on that distance. 40 days and 40 nights, it doesn't mean that he walked all the time. He stayed sometimes somewhere, but eventually he reached Mount Horeb. Why God sent him to the Mount Horeb, we read here. the mountain of God? Why God sent him? What do you think? I'll help you. He sent him to the beginning. To the beginning. He sent him to restore first love, which God demonstrated on the mount. Another word for Horeb is Sinai. To the Mount Sinai. He sent him back to the Sinai covenant, which God amazingly made with his people. And people promised that they will follow to all what God prescribed to them, which they never really did. Also, Horeb means desert. Desert. He sent him to some place which is really considered as a wilderness, as the center of the wilderness, to become wild for humans and welcomed and accepted to God. So those who are accepted by God, they supposed to be wild to other humans. We cannot be accepted by humans and by God. It doesn't work. Supernatural and natural system do not coexist well together. It conflicts with each other. And there, verse 9, and there he went into a cave every time when God wanted to spare people, same as King David. We remember that, right? Cave of Adullam. And spent the night in that place. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him. And he said to him. Do you see names here? Do you remember I told you when God wants to bring to us supernatural dialogue, he removes all names. Word of the Lord came to Elijah. It could be Jesus. It could be Jesus' visitation. Because word of the Lord from ancient time, it was said that word of the Lord is a personified form. So he came and said, what are you doing here, Elijah? Now, a little bit strange, weird question, right? God sent him, he fed him, he sent him, and now he's asking Elijah, what are you doing here, Elijah? So why God asked that question? Now, I ask you today, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? Sometimes we have to ask those questions also, what I am doing here. Am I here only because it became routine to me, a tradition? Or am I here to meet God, to get advices and insights and help and provision and support from God? So what I am doing here? So God wanted to wake up Elijah's spirit, to wake up Elijah's soul. Maybe physically the body was moved to the Mount Horeb, but he wanted for whole, holistic Elijah, his soul, spirit and body to be at that mountain. He wanted Elijah completely. That is why he asked. It was an awakening question. Verse 10, so he, Elijah, said, I have been very zealous for the Lord God of hosts. It is true. But he forgot that he was very zealous for the Lord of angels and humans. For the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant. It is true. Torn down your altar. It is true. And killed your prophets with a sword. It is true. I alone am left. Does it true? No. Do you see the matter of depression? Do you see the message, complete message of depressive soul and heart which came out from Elijah? So why God asked Elijah, what are you doing here, Elijah? Because he wanted for Elijah to verbalize his depression. That is why when you pray for people, first let them verbalize what is inside of them. They have to speak out. And most often, I would say 99%, it would be mixture of the truth and distorted reality, or which is not true. That's exactly what we see in this case with Elijah. He said several truthful things and then immediately, I alone am left. Who told him that he is alone? Maybe Satan told him, or angel of heaviness, oh, you are so poor, Elijah. You've been so good, now you're alone. Nobody cares about you. Nobody cares about me. You know this song? I am lonely, so lonely, so lonely. Nobody cares about me.
Mr. Lonely. Ain't nobody gonna love me.
Yeah. This actual lullaby of death, right? It's beautiful, beautiful tune. Sometimes actually we should sing just to wake up our spirit and soul and mind. The mixture of truth and lie from Satan, or a distorted reality of Elijah himself, put him into that depression. And they seek to take my life. Yes, but it was partial truth. Not everybody was seeking to take his life. Of course, some of them. And just to remind you a little bit about the word arise, what does it mean? Word kum is very important, kum, to maintain. When angel came to Elijah, first what he said to him, arise, arise, which means maintain yourself, prepare yourself to partake what I brought to you. Without preparation, when we eat spiritual food without preparation, it just flushes out. Doesn't make any changes in us. We have to prepare ourselves. What that faith includes, when we come here, we have to cut ourselves from all worries of this morning, of yesterday and whole week before. We have to cut, we have to throw it away from ourselves. We have to wash. Not only wash hands, feet. Yes, we wash our body, but do we really wash our brain in the morning, Sunday morning? Sometimes not. Our brain is extremely polluted. We wash our face, but we forget about inner part. That's what angel said to Elijah. Be established on my covenant, be confirmed, or be fulfilled. Be fulfilled. There are many Christians today who believe that Jesus abolished the teaching of the Lord, Torah, Scripture, prophets. That's totally distorted understanding of what fulfilling means. Fulfilling means when you're standing on the promises of God. That's what fulfilling means. Jesus came for us to be legalized, to stand on the promises of God, which brought God to us through Torah, through first 5 books of Moses, and then through prophets. That's foundation, and God legally allowed us to stand on that because of Jesus. God didn't bring Jesus to remove foundation under our feet. And in reality, what is going on today? Christians do not stand on first 5 books of Moses and prophets. Instead, Christians stand on doctrines of men which had been created in the church. That is why so much confusion happens today, misunderstanding. That is why depression is so often targets Christians today. Children of God are targeted by depression, and instead of coming to the Lord's help, they come to the medical help with pills. And what pills do with us? They poison our brain. We're becoming drug addicts. Children of God today become drug addicts. That's terrible reality. Why? Because they deny angelic help. They are ready to accept human help. In Gospel of Matthew chapter 5 verse 17, do not think today, said Jesus, do not think, doesn't matter where you are and what denomination you are, do not think that I have come to abolish, which means to make God's teaching vain, empty. The Torah or the prophets. I purposely put the Torah or the prophets because the real text says, not the law. Law is a small part of God's teaching. The biggest part is God's teaching itself. But church fathers, they purposely translated, starting with King James, the law. That's not what is written in the Bible, in original text. Do not think that I have come to abolish the Torah, the teaching, the Bible, or the prophets. I have not come to abolish. He says second time, I have not come to abolish. I know that doesn't matter how many times I tell you that, you still think that I came to abolish. But to fulfill, to make for you and me to stand on the promises of God legally and freely and not to be accused, not to be accused. What are you doing here? Said God to Elijah when he was on his run away for his life. What are you doing here? Said God to Elijah when Elijah was a loser. Why? Why God chose to bring this question to Elijah when Elijah was a loser? I tell you why. When we are losers, we are more available to God's truth than when we are winners. When we are winners, we are totally deaf and blind. Oh yes, I'm proud, I'm powerful, I'm victorious. I think we all have to wear that as medallions. Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid, little flock. For your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. It's not because of you, God says to us. It is because of me, because of my pleasure. I found pleasure in giving to you my kingdom. I found pleasure. So our God is very, very sensitive with the pleasure matter. Actually, pleasure is a great hook. It's a great hook. Satan knows that. Satan knows that. He uses pleasure all the time to hook us up and to pull away from the Lord. But what God said, I know that pleasure is a big thing to you. This world is full of pleasure. Have you noticed that? Yeah. So who created that? Who created pleasure? God himself created pleasure. He knows that we are very attached to pleasure. I don't know if anyone among humans is so much attached to the pleasure to be a loser. I don't think that losing time is a time of pleasure for humans. No, winning time is a time of pleasure. But God sometimes finds pleasure in us to be open for Him. And He is ready to give. He says here, do not be afraid, little flock. Same message to Elijah. Do not be afraid that you think that you are alone. Actually, he never been alone, but he thought that he was alone. Do not be afraid, little flock. For your Father, not King, Father, has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Kingdom is yours by the pleasure of your Father. Now, fear. Do you think that fear is just a feeling? Who understands that fear is not just a feeling?
Absolutely, Sean. It's a spirit.
I can explain it a little bit different. When you bite an apple, if apple is good, what do you feel? Pleasure, but do you feel sweetness? Or bitterness, right? So you can describe the apple just by your senses, by your feelings, right? By the taste.
You're going to experience one of two things: pleasure or fear of taste.
Can you say that apple just a pleasure of sweetness or a sense of bitterness? No. Exactly. Texture, form, right? Mass, right? So why don't we describe fear as just a feeling? Same as an apple. We have to understand that behind of your taste or your emotions, your feelings, there is a person who contains this resource to send fear inside of you, and you have to deal with complete apple, not just by the taste in your mouth. Yeah, I brought apple for you, an example of the apple, just to show you that do not build your reality just by the taste in your mouth.
Book by the cover, dig inside.
Yes, discover of who fear is. Make yourself understandable. No, make it known. Make him known to you. Make him known to you. And understand that you can deal with that by the power of the Lord God Almighty and by your obedience. You know, sometimes Christians, they fight against fear with a prayer, but they forget that it is also a matter of obedience. It just came to me also when it is a difference when you eat apples and when you drink apple juice. So God doesn't want for us to be children of the apple juice. He wants for us to be children of his garden where we can touch his fruits, look at those fruits, understand what each fruit represents. That is why he says, do not be afraid. I know that you are afraid because you think that you are very small, you are little, you are not powerful enough, you feel yourself insufficient. You live by feelings of insufficiency, but I tell you that I am your Father. I am pleased to give you my kingdom, and no one can take this kingdom from you because I found pleasure in it. That's it. Let us pray. I would recommend you when you will be back home, please look at the second page where definition of depression is described. I found very helpful definition. Think about that. Maybe you will find something inside of your life from that definition, okay? And then you can pray, and then you can realize that you can deal with that. You can get rid of that from your life and overcome this depression. Father God, we just come to you in a prayer of we are in awe. We are amazed about your beauty. We are amazed how you treated Elijah when he got this depression. You've been so patient. First, what you've done, you just provided basic needs of him. You supported him by the food from your altar. You provided for him time for rest. You also gave him direction, and you patiently waited for 40 days and 40 nights until he will finish this trip, and then you ask him, Elijah, what are you doing here? Please help us sometimes to ask those questions ourselves, what we are doing here on our journey, on our road of mission, or on our life road. Please help us to be wake up by this question, and also realize that you can provide help for us by something what we neglect, by something what we consider as unclean, as people in Israel considered those ravens as one of the most unclean birds, but you provided help and food and nourishment for your great prophet with the use of those birds, and then you provided help for him by someone who was an outcast as this widow who also was frustrated, embittered, but you provided help for him. You are amazing, God. You provide help us from most unpredicted, unimaginable resources, but help us to be open for your help, for your nourishment. Thank you for all what you've done in our lives, Jesus. In your precious name, Jesus, I am praying. Amen.